Stand on any city street today and watch a modern BMW pull up next to you at a red light. What exactly do you see? You see aggressive, predatory styling. You see a front grille large enough to casually inhale a flock of low-flying seagulls. You see an aura radiating the distinct message that the driver is highly successful, incredibly important, and absolutely under no circumstances going to use their turn signals. BMW has spent decades carefully cultivating the image of the ultimate driving machine, becoming global purveyors of high-octane luxury and track-destroying performance. But what if I told you that the entire existence of this multi-billion-dollar empire is owed to a vehicle that looks exactly like a rolling refrigerator? What if I told you the legendary savior of BMW produced less horsepower than a modern riding lawnmower and required you to enter it like you were stepping into a front-loading washing machine? Today, we are cracking open the absurd and hilarious history of the ultimate survival machine, the 1955 BMW Isetta. But before we dive headfirst into the story of this bizarre little egg on wheels, do me a massive favor and hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and ring the bell so you never miss out on the weird, wild, and wonderful stories of automotive history. The year is 1955. Post-World War II Germany is still financially recovering, and BMW is essentially standing on the edge of a jagged cliff, staring deeply into the abyss of bankruptcy. At this point in history, BMW's grand business strategy was an unmitigated disaster. They were building motorcycles, which were fine, but they were also pouring their remaining resources into massive, incredibly expensive luxury cars like the BMW 501, affectionately nicknamed the Baroque Angel. The glaring problem was that almost nobody in 1950s Europe had the liquid cash to buy a massive luxury car. Europe was flat broke. Everyday people were looking for cheap, bare-bones transportation just to get through the rain to the factory, not a leather-lined land yacht to casually cruise the Autobahn. Because of this massive miscalculation of the market, BMW was bleeding money so fast they were mere days away from being swallowed whole by their bitter arch-nemesis Mercedes-Benz. BMW desperately needed a cheap, high-volume car to sell to the working masses, but they lacked the time and capital to develop one from scratch. Enter the Italians to save the day in the most unorthodox way possible. Down in Italy, a company called Iso SPA was happily and profitably manufacturing refrigerators, motor scooters, and small commercial delivery trucks. The owner, a wildly imaginative man named Renzo Revolta, looked around at the narrow Italian city streets and realized the population desperately needed a microcar. But rather than designing a normal automobile and scaling it down, his engineering team took a very different approach. They essentially laid one of their refrigerators on its back, bolted some scooter wheels to the bottom, carved out a few windows, and called it a day. They named this contraption the Isetta, which literally translates to Little ISO. When Revolta proudly unveiled his creation at the Turin Motor Show, the traditional automotive world collectively tilted its head in utter bewildered confusion. It looked like a bubble. It looked like an egg on wheels. Up in Germany, sweating BMW executives experienced a collective eureka moment when they saw this weird Italian bubble car. It was incredibly cheap to build, ridiculously cheap to run, and the best part was they could simply buy the licensing rights from ISO rather than spending millions on research and development. So BMW pulled out their shrinking checkbook, bought the license, brought the Isetta to Munich, and forcefully sprinkled some serious German engineering onto this quirky Italian appliance. First things first, they looked at the original Italian two-stroke scooter engine, laughed, and threw it straight into the trash. In its place, BMW shoehorned in a heavily modified version of their own one-cylinder motorcycle engine. Let us take a solemn moment to properly respect the sheer, raw, unadulterated power of this mechanical beast. The 1955 BMW Isetta produced a mind-bending, earth-shattering 12 horsepower. That is not a typo. If you harnessed a moderately athletic golden retriever to a skateboard, you could theoretically give the Isetta a run for its money off a red light. The official top speed was optimistically listed at 53 miles per hour, but actually achieving that speed required a strong tailwind, a steep downhill slope, and an utter lack of personal self-preservation. But the asthmatic engine is not even close to the craziest part of the Isetta experience. The true, undisputed masterpiece of the design is how you actually get inside the thing. Because the engineers were fanatically obsessed with saving every possible millimeter of space, there are no side doors. Instead, the entire front of the car, the nose, the windshield, the wipers, and the steering wheel, is a single giant door that swings outward on a heavy-duty side hinge. To enter the vehicle, you walk around to the front, grab the handle, pull the entire face of the car open, and awkwardly step backward onto the two-person bench seat. It genuinely feels less like getting into a car and more like boarding a deep-sea submersible designed by a brilliant madman. You might be wondering, if the entire front of the car swings open, what happens to the steering wheel? This is where the sheer genius of engineering desperation truly shines. The steering column is ingeniously attached to the front door, utilizing a brilliant universal joint system. When you swing the heavy front door open to get in, the steering wheel and the entire minimalist dashboard pivot outward alongside it, completely moving out of your way so you can freely step inside. When you finally sit down and pull the massive door shut behind you, the steering wheel swings smoothly back into your lap, locking you into place like a safety bar on a terrifying carnival roller coaster. And locking you in is a highly appropriate way to describe the sensation, because driving the Isetta was a daily exercise in claustrophobic terror. There was no crumple zone. You were the crumple zone. Your kneecaps were resting approximately 3 inches away from whatever object you were inevitably about to hit. Furthermore, if you happened to parallel park a little too close to a solid brick wall, you literally could not open the front door to get out. You are trapped inside a German bubble. Because of this potentially fatal design flaw, BMW kindly included a canvas folding sunroof as standard equipment. This was not a luxury feature for enjoying a summer breeze. It was a mandated emergency escape hatch. If you parked facing a wall, you had to unlatch the fabric roof, stand on the bench seat, and awkwardly climb out the top like a distressed tank commander abandoning a sinking ship. The wheel layout was yet another marvel of cost-cutting insanity. From the front, it appeared to be a tiny, normal car, but at the rear, the two back wheels were placed a mere 19 inches apart. Because the rear track was so narrow, the car didn't even require a heavy differential to take corners without the rear tires scrubbing. This saved precious weight and money, but it made the car look incredibly unstable, and honestly, it was. If you dared to take a corner too fast, you actively risked tipping the entire car over like a heavily caffeinated toddler on a tricycle. But nobody was taking corners fast, because you were working with a 4-speed manual transmission that shifted with all the grace of a wooden spoon stirring a bucket of gravel. The tiny shift lever was placed awkwardly on the left side of the driver, making every single gear change feel like you were aggressively trying to scratch an itch on your left ankle. Despite all these bizarre quirks, the utter absurdity of its appearance, and the fact that you were piloting a fragile glass egg, the Isetta was an absolute runaway commercial triumph. Why? Impeccable timing. In 1956, the global Suez crisis hit, severely disrupting the vital flow of oil to Europe. Gas prices absolutely skyrocketed and strict fuel rationing was introduced. Suddenly, those heavy, gas-guzzling luxury cars BMW couldn't sell became completely useless. But the tiny Isetta could easily achieve over 70 miles to a single gallon of gasoline. It was a fuel-sipping marvel in an era when fuel was suddenly worth its weight in gold. Almost instantly, the weird little Isetta became the hottest commodity in Europe. It morphed into a bizarre high-society fashion statement. Wealthy doctors, lawyers, and international celebrities were suddenly seen cheerfully zipping around city centers in these tiny bubbles. Elvis Presley famously purchased one for his manager. Hollywood legend Cary Grant was photographed casually driving one. It was the absolute peak of automotive irony. It was also incredibly practical. It was so remarkably tiny that you could park it nose in directly to the curb. You could pull up straight to the sidewalk, pop open the entire front of the car, step directly onto the pavement, and stroll right into the bakery. It was urban mobility perfected decades before anyone dared to utter the words smart car. Between 1955 and 1962, BMW remarkably managed to sell over 161,000 Isettas to the eager public. The massive influx of cash generated by this goofy little rolling cheese wedge was monumental for the struggling company. It provided BMW with the crucial financial breathing room they desperately needed. The Isetta single-handedly allowed them to pay their bills, keep the factory lights on, ward off the predatory clutches of Mercedes-Benz, and eventually fund the development of the BMW new class sedans in the 1960s. Those sedans officially put the company back on the global map, setting the stage for the modern performance empire we know today. So, the next time you see a guy in a sleek, hyper-aggressive BMW loudly revving his twin-turbo engine at a stoplight, trying incredibly hard to look intimidating behind his tinted windows, just offer him a knowing smile. Smile because you know the hilarious historical truth. You know that without a 12-horsepower Italian-designed refrigerator featuring an emergency escape hatch in the roof and a giant singular door on the front, his glorious ultimate driving machine would literally not exist today. The mighty, imposing BMW corporate empire was built quite literally on the tiny, fragile back of a rolling glass egg. And honestly, that's beautifully hilarious.